Zariah Brooks stepped out of the store, holding a receipt, not stolen goods, when the alarm blared, and 3 white officers drew their guns. She raised her hands, pleading, "Check the cameras," but they never did. What they found in her trunk shocked the city, and what she said in court the next day. It changed everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The Atlanta wind whipped through the December air like it had something to prove. The city hadn't seen snow in years, but this morning, a brittle chill clung to every surface. Autumn Carter, 32 years old, braced herself against the biting cold as she zipped up her frayed work jacket and slid her debit card into pump number 3. The hum of morning radio played softly through her cracked car speakers, and the smell of gasoline mingled with distant hints of burnt coffee from the convenience store next door. It was 6:47 a.m. She had 13 minutes before her double shift at the medical billing center began. Another long day under fluorescent lights, deciphering codes for procedures she'd never afford. She glanced across the lot and noticed him, an elderly white man, back hunched, trembling slightly, fumbling with a worn leather wallet. His fingers, calloused, mottled with liver spots, fought with a stubborn gas card. As the machine blinked, transaction failed for the 3rd time. His posture held a stubborn dignity, but his eyes flickered with embarrassment. Autumn hesitated. She knew that hesitation. It was the same breath her mother used to take in grocery store aisles when a white cashier double-checked their food stamps. The same pause she saw in her reflection every time a security guard followed her in a store. That moment where kindness might be mistaken for pity, and pity could curdle into insult. But something about the man, the way his navy baseball cap sat crooked on his head, the single tear balanced on his lower lid, the defeated slump of his shoulders moved her feet before her brain caught up. Without a word, Autumn stepped to his pump, swiped her own card, and quietly keyed in her zip code. $40 lit up on the display. She turned to him, gave the briefest nod, and whispered, "You're good." The old man blinked. "Wait, what, miss? I didn't—" "It's all right," she said gently. "Just take care of yourself." He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to cry. But Autumn was already walking away, the wind catching her curls and tugging at her sleeves. She didn't wait for a thank you. She didn't need it. She climbed into her Honda Civic, the upholstery worn thin, and pulled away. Her hands trembled not from cold, but from the strange combination of adrenaline and humility. She didn't know why she'd done it. She only knew it felt right. Behind her, the old man straightened. His hands, once shaking, now held the pump with steadiness. He filled his tank and then stood in place, watching her taillights vanish into traffic. Slowly, he brought his hand up in a shaky, solemn salute, not to a flag, not to a uniform, but to a stranger. What Autumn didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that across the lot, a teenage girl named Layla Monroe had been sitting in her brother's parked car, waiting for him to grab coffee. Her TikTok app had been open, but her eyes had drifted to the unfolding scene. She'd hit record without thinking, just instinctively capturing something real. In her unedited video, you could see the veterans fumbling, Autumn's quiet approach, the brief exchange, and finally, that heartbreaking salute. By the time Autumn reached her job, she'd forgotten the moment. She clocked in at exactly 7:01 a.m., offered a half-smile to Tanya, her shift supervisor, and took her seat behind a humming computer screen. For the next 8 hours, she processed invoices, fought off a migraine, skipped lunch, and ignored the persistent vibration of her phone in her pocket. But outside her knowledge, that video had exploded. By 10:12 a.m., it had been posted to Twitter with the caption, "She didn't do it for the cameras, she did it from the heart." By 11:00 a.m., it was picked up by a small local news station. By 2:00 p.m., it had 500,000 views, and growing. By 5:00 p.m., The Shade Room, BuzzFeed, and Veterans Weekly had all reposted it. The world was watching Autumn Carter, and she didn't even know. Back at her apartment, that night, the streetlights flickered as she unlocked the door with aching fingers. Inside, the apartment was modest, walls lined with discount store decor and family photos. A single candle flickered on her kitchen counter, lavender, her mother's favorite scent. She tossed her purse on the couch, kicked off her shoes, and grabbed the last of a frozen casserole from the fridge. The television murmured in the background. She didn't notice her own face flashing across the screen behind a stunned newscaster. Autumn's phone buzzed again. 50 missed calls. 20 text messages from unknown numbers. 2 voicemails from news stations. She stared at it, frowned, finally opened Twitter, and froze. There, pinned at the top of her feed, was her face in profile, caught in a candid frame, eyes focused on the gas pump, lips gently moving as she spoke to the veteran. The image was powerful, poised, quietly revolutionary. The caption, "Her name is Autumn Carter. Let's make sure America never forgets her." Her heart pounded. She hadn't asked for this. She didn't want it. She wasn't trying to go viral. She was just trying to be decent in a world that often wasn't. The casserole sat cold on her lap. She stood in the middle of her small living room, surrounded by silence, by the echoes of her late mother's wisdom, by the weight of unexpected visibility. And then, a knock at the door. 3 soft rap. She hadn't ordered anything. She wasn't expecting anyone. She walked to the door slowly, looked through the peephole, and stopped breathing. There, standing outside her apartment, were 3 men in military dress uniforms, their expressions unreadable. She opened the door, and everything she thought she knew about that one act of kindness would unravel into something she never could have imagined. By the time the streetlights blinked off in Atlanta and the morning sun cracked over the rooftops, Autumn Carter's life was no longer hers. Somewhere between the fading warmth of her act and the cold algorithms of the internet, her story had morphed into a storm. The video of her paying for a stranger's gas, quiet, unscripted, deeply human, was now a viral monsoon tearing through timelines. It started with a 17-second clip posted by Lila Monroe, a teen with under 1,000 followers. Her caption read, "She didn't wait for thanks, she just helped and left. Be like her." It was raw, no filters, no edits, just Autumn, a stranger, and a salute. By midnight, the clip had hit 500,000 views. By dawn, it was everywhere. Instagram Reels set it to orchestral music. TikTokers reenacted it, some crying on cue. Twitter spun it into a cultural moment. Headlines screamed, "The woman who didn't need an audience. Kindness in action. Angel at the pump." But not everyone applauded. Within hours, the internet's darker corners crawled into view. Threads accusing Autumn of staging the moment emerged. Commenters called her a liberal plant, a race baiter, a welfare queen trying to go viral. Old tweets, some out of context, others deeply personal, were unearthed. Her statement from 2020 protests resurfaced. "America doesn't love black women, we just learn how to survive it." That line was all certain outlets needed. On Facebook, a retired sheriff shared her image with the words, "She hates the country that gave her freedom." Thousands liked it. On YouTube, a popular right-wing commentator posted a 12-minute video breaking down the manipulation behind her moment. He played the clip frame by frame, suggesting camera angles were too perfect. He mocked the salute, calling it a convenient Hollywood beat. The video hit 400,000 views in less than 6 hours. While praise poured in from activists, veterans, and social justice organizations, a river of racial hostility ran just as strong. Autumn's old employer, Clear Hope Medical Billing, began receiving calls. Some praised her, others demanded she be terminated. Her email was leaked, so was her phone number. So was the address where she no longer lived. In a quiet suburb on the city's edge, Autumn slept under a borrowed blanket, unaware the internet had painted a bullseye on her life. Her phone buzzed like a dying creature, its screen flashing endlessly beneath her pillow. When the alarm chimed at 7:00 a.m., she stirred, groggy and sore. Her double shift loomed. With a yawn, she reached for her phone and blinked at the barrage of notifications. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages, her name trending on Twitter. She sat up, blinked again, then froze. There she was, on every major platform, her face captured mid-step, her posture strong, her expression calm. The shot was beautiful in a way she hadn't intended. Autumn's heart pounded. She scrolled through mentions, her stomach twisting tighter with every second. Some comments praised her as a national treasure. Others hurled racial slurs with a fluency that felt weaponized. She checked her voicemail. Channel 5 News Atlanta had called twice, asking for an exclusive. An old college friend she hadn't spoken to in years texted, "Are you okay? Call me." Her aunt left a message in tears. "Baby, I saw you on TV. You looked just like your mama." Autumn turned off the phone. She sat on the edge of the bed, numb. What started as a simple act of decency had spiraled into something unrecognizable. She wasn't sure if she felt honored, violated, or afraid. Maybe all three. At 9:17 a.m., she peeked through the blinds. Two news vans sat parked across the street. A woman in heels stood with a mic in hand, staring up at Autumn's building. A man with a sign that read Autumn 2024 waved at her window. She backed away, breath shallow. Dialed Tanya at work. "Hey, I can't come in today." "You okay, Autumn?" Tanya sounded worried but unsurprised. "Phones have been ringing since 6. You're all over the news." Autumn exhaled. "I just need a day. Maybe 2. Tanya paused. "I'll let HR know. Just be careful." "Okay." She ended the call and sat in silence. The world was watching. Not just her kindness, but her past, her politics, her blackness. She had become both symbol and target. 3 knocks startled her. Not harsh, gentle, deliberate. She froze, peeked out again. No one she recognized. She didn't open the door. Instead, she slid to the floor and buried her face in her hands. Meanwhile, over 2,000 miles away, inside a quiet Navy installation tucked near Coronado, California, a different kind of attention was brewing. In a secured room lined with monitors, a group of men watched the same video again and again. No one spoke at first. They were elite, hardened, brotherhoods, built in blood and sand. Then, one younger man leaned forward, eyes squinting at the screen. "That's him," he said quietly. "That's Walt Maddox." The others turned. "You sure?" asked Grayson Dunn, a grizzled commander whose silence usually said enough. The younger man nodded. "That shoulder, see how it doesn't fully lift? That's from Sudan. Operation Breaklight. He took shrapnel and refused evac. Saved 5 of us." Grayson narrowed his eyes at the image. "Thought Maddox was off-grid. Guess he came back for something," the younger man replied. Silence returned. Then Grayson stood. "Get me his file." And a line to Norfolk. Someone asked, "What's this got to do with the girl?" Grayson didn't answer. He just stared at the image of Autumn Carter caught mid-step in a viral storm, then whispered to himself, "We owe that man everything. And if he saluted her, we owe her too." Orders were issued, files unlocked, somewhere deep within a military command center. Wheels began turning, setting into motion a reckoning. Autumn Carter never asked for, from people she never knew existed. In a windowless conference room deep inside a fortified Navy compound in Norfolk, Virginia. The temperature was cool, but the air was thick with something unspoken. The men seated around the table weren't politicians or executives. They were ghosts, former SEALs, retired but not forgotten. Each bore invisible scars, some etched into flesh, others carved deeper, into conscience. At the head of the table, Grayson Gray Dunn stood in full uniform, though he hadn't worn one in years. In front of him, projected on the wall, was a paused frame from the viral video. Walt Maddox, mid-salute, his eyes glassy, his body frail, saluting a black woman who walked away without knowing her life had just collided with his.
"You're all here because of that man,"
Grayson said, voice low, precise. "Walt Maddox. He vanished in '08. We assumed he'd gone dark, or worse." Noah Prescott, stocky, mid-50s with thick gray stubble, crossed his arms. "He told us he was done, said the job had eaten everything good out of him." "He lied," muttered Miles Reardon, the team's former medic. "He didn't disappear. He was hiding." The projector clicked. A second image filled the screen. Walt in uniform, decades younger, smiling faintly. SEAL badge shining. "And this," Grayson said, "was him in 1995. Operation Clay Dust." A few heads lowered. That op wasn't supposed to exist, but they remembered it. The mission had gone sideways in East Africa. Their unit had been ambushed near the Sudanese border. 4 days without extraction. 2 men down. Radio dead. Rations gone. It should have ended in body bags. But a small, unnamed African village had intervened, risking their lives to protect foreign soldiers who didn't look like them, didn't speak their language, and carried weapons that had once hunted their ancestors. Those villagers sheltered the SEALs in their homes. They fed them, hid them from rebel patrols, treated wounds with bark and prayer. Most of the SEALs had wanted to stay and help rebuild after extraction. But Walt, as commanding officer, had received pressure from above. DC brass demanded immediate withdrawal. And just days later, that same village was razed in a retaliatory strike. Officially, the US never knew it existed. Unofficially, Walt had never forgiven himself. He tried to resign after that, Grayson said. The Navy wouldn't let him. promoted him instead. And now he's living like a ghost, Miles whispered, carrying guilt the size of a continent. Silence. Then Grayson spoke again. He left us instructions, 3 weeks ago, mailed to my home. Said if anything ever happened to him, we were to find the woman he saluted. He turned back to the screen. Her name is Autumn Carter. The room stirred. She's not a celebrity, not a soldier, not rich, just a woman who did something no one else did that day. She stopped. She paid, and she walked away. Noah grunted. That's all it took for Maddox to break silence. Grayson nodded. She reminded him of what he lost. What we all did. But why us? Asked Eli Barrett, the youngest in the room. Why bring us back? Grayson clicked another image, an encrypted letter in Walt's handwriting. They saved us once. She saved me again. Honor her. He called in a debt, Grayson said, and we're going to pay it. But not everyone agreed. In the shadows of the room, Travis Hale, an ex-SEAL turned defense contractor, shook his head. This ain't our place, Gray. We owe him. Sure. But repaying kindness with parades? She didn't ask for this. No, she didn't, Grayson said quietly. Which is why it matters. Travis leaned forward. You forget how the world sees her. A black woman in the spotlight is one wrong breath from backlash. We shine too bright on her. We might burn her down. She's already burning, Eli muttered. You seen the hate she's getting? The threats? Grayson stepped away from the screen. Then we don't show up with noise. We show up with presence. Quiet, strong, strategic. What's the plan? Asked Miles. Simple, Grayson said. We honor Walt's wishes, protect her, and make sure no one rewrites what she did. Noah chuckled bitterly. You know they're already trying. She's been called everything from a fraud to a Marxist. They're trying to bury her kindness under politics. Then we dig her out, Grayson said. They all stared at the screen again. Autumn's blurry silhouette, back turned, her gesture frozen in time. Outside that compound, Autumn sat in her apartment, unaware that men who had once toppled governments were now plotting to protect her. But her day had begun with static. The emails had worsened, some laced with venom, others with veiled threats. One simply read, "We know where you live." She ignored the media requests, turned down calls from journalists, and declined offers of money to tell her side. She had no side, just exhaustion. She stayed indoors, curtains drawn, lights dim, until her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a private number. She let it ring. Then another buzz, this time a notification from her home camera system. She froze, checked the app. There, on her porch, barely visible through the low-resolution feed, were silhouettes, tall, broad-shouldered, unmoving. 3 men, all wearing what appeared to be military dress uniforms. She stepped back from the phone, heart racing. Another knock firm. Controlled. She whispered to herself. What is this? Her hands trembled as she reached for the door handle. Before she could open it, a man's voice called through the door, steady and low. Miss Carter, we need to speak with you. This is about Walt Maddox, and something he left behind for you. The second knock was louder. 3 raps. Precise, measured. The kind of knock that didn't ask, it declared. Autumn Carter froze, her back pressed against the wall, breath caught halfway between dread and disbelief. Her mind raced. Why were men in military dress on her porch? Why now? And why mention Walt Maddox? A man she barely knew. The air in her apartment felt heavier, like the walls had inched inward. For a fleeting second, she thought of not answering, just backing away, turning off the lights, pretending no one was home. But something deeper, a voice that sounded like her mother's whispered, "Courage doesn't knock, baby. It waits for you to answer." She stepped forward, slowly, and opened the door. 12 men stood before her, lined in 2 rows like a living monument. Most were in dress blues. 2 wore medals so numerous they looked heavy enough to bend time. Their postures were straight, expressions solemn. Only one, the tallest among them, salt and pepper hair clipped military short, stepped forward. His name tag read "Done." Autumn instinctively took a step back. What is this? What's going on? Grayson Dunn removed his cap, revealing a face lined not just by age, but by memory. No threat, Miss Carter. No cameras. No reporters. Just us. His voice was low and grounded. She didn't speak. Didn't have to. Another stepped forward. Eli Barrett, the youngest, He held a folded American flag, cradled in both hands like sacred glass. Behind him, Miles Rardon held a weathered envelope in a small black case. Grayson continued, his tone deliberate. Walt Maddox was more than a veteran. He was one of us, a SEAL, a legend, and a man who carried demons most of us couldn't bear. Autumn's brows drew tight. Why are you telling me this? Because, he said, you changed his life, and he wanted you to know. She looked at the items they held, then back to them. I only paid for his gas. Grayson nodded, and it undid 30 years of silence. With her unspoken permission, they entered quietly. No boots on, no noise. They moved like reverent ghosts through her small apartment, settling gently into the living room. Autumn sat across from them, knees tucked, eyes wary. Miles handed her the envelope. This is from Walt. His handwriting. No one's read it but you. Hands trembling, Autumn opened the letter. It was written in crisp penmanship. The first line nearly stole her breath. Autumn, I once followed orders that destroyed lives because those lives didn't look like mine. She read on, each word heavier than the last. I lived through wars, through betrayal, through lies wrapped in flags. But I never saw true courage until I saw you turn around, pay for a stranger, and walk away like it meant nothing. That act, small as it was, broke me. Tears blurred the page. I've hated the way I've lived. I was silent when I should have spoken. I obeyed when I should have refused. But you acted without being asked. No audience, no reward, just kindness. And that changed something in me. Her lips trembled. The men sat in silence, eyes fixed on the floor. At the bottom of the envelope was a second, smaller note. This is not a gift. It's a correction. Miles opened the black case and handed her a cashier's check. Fifth. Autumn stared at it like it was radioactive. I can't take this, she whispered. You already have, Grayson said. Walt left strict instructions. No strings, no press, just pass it forward, how you see fit. I didn't do anything. You reminded him who he wanted to be. She held the check, the paper heavy in her palm. The air seemed to shimmer around her like glass before it shatters. For so long, kindness had been currency she couldn't afford, and now, someone had placed a lifetime of guilt into her hands, wrapped in paper and apology. I don't want to be anyone's redemption, she said, voice cracking. You're not, Grayson replied gently. You're his mirror. The room fell quiet again. In that silence, Autumn saw flashes of her mother's face, proud, principled, unbowed in the face of decades of injustice. She remembered her father telling her, they'll call it radical when it's just decent. She thought of the cold mornings he'd walk her to school, past Confederate flags and unspoken hatred. Grayson stood to leave. You don't have to understand it all now, but you should know, he died believing in something again. And that something was you. Autumn didn't move. She could only nod. The men filed out as silently as they'd entered, leaving behind folded cloth, a check and a letter that felt like a confession from a dying country. She didn't open the door again. She sat on the couch, letter in hand, trying to breathe. The sun dipped lower. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again. She picked it up, a call from the VA hospital in Memphis. The nurse's voice was calm but curt. Miss Carter, I'm sorry to inform you, Mr. Walter Maddox is missing. He checked himself out against doctor's orders this morning, left a note behind. You were mentioned. Autumn's blood ran cold. What did the note say? She asked. The nurse hesitated. It just said, she deserves the whole truth. As the line disconnected, Autumn glanced at her door and noticed a small envelope had been slipped underneath. Her name was scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside a single key and a GPS coordinate. By morning the media circus had grown teeth. Autumn Carter's living room, once a place of quiet reflection and Sunday tea, now felt like a war zone of ring lights, microphones, and digital noise. Emails flooded in by the hour. Influencers offered her brand deals. A major news network offered to fly her to New York first class. Her image was on t-shirts, coffee mugs, murals. Even the mayor's office reached out, carefully crafted, of course to celebrate a local hero. She didn't feel like one. She felt like she was being swallowed alive. Despite the overload, Autumn agreed to one interview. Just one. The platform had to be big. She insisted. No soft questions. No polished lies. If she was going to speak, it would be real. 2 days later, she was seated under studio lights across from Tessa Whitmore on Good Morning America. Autumn, you didn't film the moment. You didn't post it. Yet here you are. Why do you think people are responding so strongly? Autumn blinked once, then twice. Her voice came steady but slow, each word peeled from a deeper place. Because they're not used to seeing a black woman giving without needing anything back. They're not used to seeing us as enough. Tessa's expression softened. Enough? Autumn nodded. See, we're allowed to be angry, or broken, or defiant. But kind, quiet, that makes people uncomfortable. Because it exposes their own silence, their own apathy. So now the world doesn't know what to do with me. The live audience behind the cameras was dead silent. She continued, her voice rising slightly. Racism doesn't always come wearing hoods or holding torches. Sometimes, it looks like who gets the benefit of the doubt, who gets believed, who gets followed in a store, or who gets saluted at a gas station. The interview cut to commercial with applause. But when Autumn checked her phone in the dressing room, the real reaction was waiting. Screenshots of her quote, "They're not used to seeing us as enough," were already plastered across social media. And not everyone applauded. Under a thread praising her honesty, replies flooded in. Reverse racism much. She's playing the victim again. So tired of these race hustlers acting like martyrs. One user posted a photo from her college days, a party pic, red cup in hand, and captioned it, "Our hero in 2012. What else is she hiding?" Another account shared an anonymous classmate confession. Autumn used to act too good for us white girls. Always made everything about race. I'm not surprised she's cashing in now. Even Clear Hope Medical Billing, her employer of 6 years, weighed in with a formal notice of suspension. The email read, "In light of recent public scrutiny surrounding Ms. Carter's conduct and media involvement, we are placing her on temporary leave pending an internal review. No hearing, no defense, just silence with a signature." Autumn closed her laptop and wept for the first time in days. Not for herself, but for the ugliness still living in the corners of every institution that had once promised her neutrality. Later that night, as her apartment dimmed to shadows, she received a second call from the VA hospital in Memphis. This time, the nurse's tone was different, urgent.
Miss Carter, I apologize for earlier confusion. We've located Mr. Maddox. He checked himself back in, under his original VA credentials. He's asked to speak to you. He's not well.
Her throat tightened. Is he dying? He won't say. But he keeps repeating your name. Autumn booked the first available rental. The trip from Atlanta to Memphis would take nearly 6 hours. She packed lightly, jean sweaters, one photo of her mother, and the letter Walt left behind. As she drove north on I-22, her mind looped through fragments. Her suspension, the viral slander, the quiet guilt in Walt's writing, the kindness she'd offered without expectation. Each mile deepened her thoughts, and her resolve. Somewhere near Boonville, she saw it. The diner was small, brick-walled, barely held together by time. A battered sign hung above the roof. Southern Star Cafe. A worn Pepsi machine buzzed near the door, and next to the entrance, nailed just beneath an American flag, was a faded Confederate banner, its edges fraying in the breeze. Autumn slowed instinctively. The image pierced her like a sliver of bone. The parking lot was mostly empty. 2 pickup trucks, both with bumper stickers declaring heritage not hate. She pulled in anyway. Her hands were trembling, her stomach tight, but she hadn't eaten since dawn, and she needed coffee badly. She reminded herself, you don't fight symbols, you fight system. Inside, the bell above the door gave a weak jingle. The waitress behind the counter paused, her eyes lingering a second too long on Autumn's face. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just you. Autumn nodded. To go, please. Coffee. Black. The woman scribbled, then turned. At a nearby booth, 2 older men muttered something under their breath. Autumn didn't catch it all, just the last part. Should have stayed in Atlanta. She didn't flinch, didn't breathe, just stood still as stone until her coffee arrived. As she walked back to the car, a young boy, maybe 10, peeked through the diner window, his face pressed to the glass. He mouthed something silently, something that looked a lot like thank you. She froze. For just a moment, the ugliness around her peeled back, and that small face, curious, wide-eyed, innocent, reminded her why she kept going. She climbed back into the car and placed the coffee in the holder with shaking fingers. The GPS recalculated. Next stop, VA Hospital, Memphis. But before she could pull out, her phone vibrated again, this time with a new voicemail from an unlisted number. A voice she didn't recognize whispered urgently, "If you're going to see Walt, go now. He may not be there much longer, and you're not the only one looking for him." Memphis didn't welcome Autumn Carter the way Atlanta had mourned losing her to the world. There was no mural waiting for her in the streets, no warm press outside the hospital, just thick humidity, faded buildings, and long-held glances that lasted a beat too long. Even the air felt heavier, like it carried whispers from decades ago. Her first stop was a small grocery store near the edge of town. She needed water, something to settle her nerves before facing Walter Maddox. Inside, the overhead lights buzzed like angry flies, and the floor tiles were cracked with stories no one had the courage to clean up. As she passed down the narrow aisle, an older white woman behind the register tracked her every move. No greeting, no smile, just eyes full of unspoken rules. Autumn placed a bottle of water and a granola bar on the counter, forcing her voice steady. "Hi." The woman didn't respond immediately. She scanned the water, then paused. "You with the media?" "No," Autumn replied. "Just passing through." The woman studied her more intently now. "You look like that girl, the one from the gas station video." Autumn's fingers tightened around her wallet. "I get that sometimes." The cashier didn't say more, but her silence was loud. Autumn paid in cash. As she walked to her car, a security guard had appeared, arms folded across his chest, staring like she'd just pocketed a crime. That silent scrutiny pulled a memory from the shadows of Autumn's mind, a memory too familiar to be random. She was 8. Her father had taken her to a gas station after school. He was tall, proud, always composed. She remembered him handing a crumpled 20 to the clerk, but minutes later the clerk accused him of stealing candy. Cops arrived. Her father stood silent as his pockets were turned out in front of her. Nothing was found, of course, but the shame stayed. On the ride home, her father said just one thing: "Even when you're clean, they'll look at you like you're dirty." That same dust clung to her now, all these years later, as she drove toward the VA hospital in silence. The brick exterior of the hospital loomed ahead, tucked behind a rusted fence. She parked and walked with purpose through sliding glass doors. The lobby smelled of bleach and cafeteria soup. A nearby TV was playing her Good Morning America segment on mute, subtitles dancing beneath her face. She reached room 311 with shaky fingers and knocked. Inside, Walt Maddox was awake. He looked smaller than she remembered. His frame was swallowed by white sheets, and tubes snaked in and out of his arms. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the ticking of a cheap clock on the wall, but the walls spoke louder. They were lined with war memorabilia, photographs, flags, medals, and one tattered map pinned to a corkboard. When he saw her, something shifted in his face. "You came," he rasped. "I said I would." She sat beside him. His hand twitched, reaching slowly toward a photo on the nightstand. A young black woman in a nurse's uniform. The photo was faded, folded once down the middle. "Her name was Eloise," he said. "She was the only one who stayed behind when the village cleared out. Patched me up, saved my life. I never even said thank you." Autumn didn't speak. He turned back to her. "You reminded me of her. The way you moved. The way you helped without asking anything in return." Her voice cracked. "You didn't have to do all this. The money, the flag, the letter." Walt shook his head slowly. "I did. Because no medal I ever earned felt as honest as what you gave me." He reached into the drawer beside his bed and pulled out a sealed envelope. "For your eyes only," he whispered. Her name was written in shaky cursive, across the front. She took it carefully, tucking it into her bag. The weight of it felt heavier than the paper inside. "You should know," Walt continued. "You're not just internet famous. You're a fault line now. You shook something deep, and they're watching." Autumn frowned. "Who?" He looked at her, and there was a flicker of sorrow. "The ones who think America only belongs to them." They sat in silence a while longer. He drifted in and out, his breathing shallow. When it was time to leave, she touched his hand and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." He opened one eye and smiled faintly. "Don't let them write the ending without you." She left the hospital in a daze, clutching the envelope like a live wire. As the sun set over Memphis, she navigated her way back to the hotel. Her GPS directed her through back roads and dim neighborhoods. There were few cars, even fewer lights. Then it happened, flashing red and blue behind her. Her pulse spiked. She pulled over slowly, heart racing, hands on the wheel. A state trooper emerged from his vehicle, heavy boots crunching gravel, mid-40s, white, stiff posture, sunglasses even though the sun was gone. He tapped on her window. She rolled it down halfway. License and registration. Is there a problem? She asked. License and registration, he repeated, louder. She handed him the documents. He looked them over and paused. You from Atlanta? She nodded. Just visiting. He stared for a long time, then leaned slightly closer. You that lady from the video? Autumn's throat tightened. I'm just passing through. He smirked. Lot of folks think you're real brave. Stirring all that up. She didn't respond. You have a good night, he finally said. Then walked back to his cruiser and sat there for another full minute before pulling away. She didn't move. Not for several minutes. Not until her hands stopped shaking. Then her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Nice visit. Not everyone forgets who people like you really are. Her blood turned cold. She turned in her seat, heart hammering. There, written in the dust on her back windshield, were two chilling words.
Go home.
Autumn stared at it, and just as her hand reached for the keys, her phone buzzed again, this time with a file attachment titled Maddox Truth Night. The sky above Memphis had turned ink black by the time Autumn Carter left the cracked asphalt of the roadside shoulder. The red and blue lights had faded from her rearview mirror, but the echo of them still pulsed behind her eyes. Her foot stayed on the brake longer than necessary, like her body needed time to convince itself she was free to move again. She gripped the steering wheel tighter than before, the weight of the text message and the words etched into her windshield pressing against her like cinder blocks. Go home. Those two words were simple, but they carried the weight of generations. She turned onto the I-240 ramp when the headlights behind her grew closer again. A minute later they flashed once, twice, then siren. She pulled over, throat tightening. Again, the cruiser skidded to a halt behind her. A different vehicle, a different badge, same feeling. This time, the officer approached fast, no pause, no measured authority, just boots hitting pavement with force. His flashlight snapped against her window. Out of the vehicle, he barked before she could even lower the glass. Autumn's pulse leapt to her throat.
I just got pulled over.
Out. Now. She complied, moving slowly, her hands raised. The weight of Walt's envelope still in her bag. Her driver's license zipped in her wallet. Her movements smooth, careful, practiced, like every black parent teaches their child. Hands on the hood. She obeyed. He stepped close. Mid-40s, white, square jaw and the hollow eyes of someone looking to teach a lesson. This your car? He asked. Yes. You sure about that?
Yes. I rented it at the airport.
You can check the agreement. He didn't respond. He radioed in, reading off her license plate and last name. Then came the line she had feared since the moment his lights flashed. We got a report of a stolen gray Nissan matching this plate. You fit the description. Autumn turned her head slightly. What description would that be? He ignored the question. Got any drugs or weapons in the vehicle? No. You mind if I search? Yes, I do mind, she said calmly. I haven't done anything wrong. He stepped closer. That sounds like someone trying to hide something. Her hands began to tremble. I'd like to speak to an attorney. He scoffed. This ain't a courtroom, sweetheart. You're on a highway in Tennessee. And then it happened. The snap of the cuffs behind her. Cold metal gripped her wrists as she was pressed against the car, her cheek against its warm surface. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. But inside, something folded in on itself. The officer called in for backup, as if she were a threat. She could hear voices crackling through his radio, couldn't make out the words. And then memory broke through. A flashback. Her younger brother Emery, age 17, 2 months away from starting at Howard University. He was driving their father's old sedan when the police pulled him over near College Park. Someone had reported a suspicious black male in a silver vehicle. They cuffed him, threw his books on the ground, pressed his face into gravel. He came home bleeding but said nothing. The photos from that night were stored in Autumn's mind like film negatives, unprocessed but permanent. Back in the present, the officer stood several feet away, speaking into his radio, glancing occasionally at Autumn. She could hear the doubt in his voice now. Whoever he'd spoken to must have realized something didn't match. Her registration was clean. The plates hadn't been reported, and her rental agreement was tucked inside the glove box. just like she'd said. 10 minutes later, he uncuffed her. "You're free to go." "That's it?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded, without apology. "It was just a miscommunication. You have a good night." He turned back to his cruiser like nothing had happened. Autumn stood still for a long time. Her wrists were red. Her voice was gone. But her mind screamed. She climbed back into the car and didn't move. Instead, she stared through the windshield at nothing. In the side mirror, she saw him drive off into the dark. Far away, in a secure Navy chat room, buried in military-grade encryption, Grayson Dunn received a red-coded ping. It was from one of the retired SEAL spotters he'd quietly stationed around Autumn, after Walt's letter. A live feed snapshot confirmed the traffic stop, and within seconds, Dunn forwarded it to 2 former team members. "This ends tonight," he typed. They didn't wait for permission. Meanwhile, Autumn finally reached the hotel. It was a modest place, white brick, low roof, the kind of roadside motel that didn't ask too many questions. She parked under the flickering light, near the back corner. The air smelled like burnt oil and wet concrete. She stepped out and froze. Glass crunched beneath her feet. The rear windows of her car were smashed in. Shards covered the seats. Her bag was still there, but the glove box had been rifled through. Contents and then she saw it, taped to the steering wheel, a torn piece of receipt paper, 3 words scrawled in thick black marker. "Stay in your lane." Her stomach dropped. There were no security cameras nearby, no witnesses, just silence. And she stood there, the broken glass sparkling like ash beneath her boots. As the reality settled in, this wasn't just trolling. This wasn't anonymous comments. This was someone close, watching, acting. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her fingers hesitated. Who could she call?
Not the police.
Not the hotel manager.
No. Instead, she opened her encrypted inbox, the one Grayson had set up using a dummy email. She typed just 2 words. "They hit." Then she added a photo of the smashed window. A response came back within 2 minutes.
"We're coming."
As Autumn turned toward her room, something sharp crunched beneath her shoe. She looked down. Beneath a shard of glass was a tiny military challenge coin, etched with the insignia of SEAL Team Echo. But it wasn't Walt's. Someone else was leaving her a message, and it wasn't a friendly one. The sun hadn't yet broken through the dense Memphis haze when Autumn Carter slid her room key across the motel front desk counter. Her eyes were red, her posture tired but upright. The young white clerk behind the counter didn't offer eye contact, let alone sympathy. His earbuds stayed in as he muttered, "Checking out early."
Yes,
Autumn replied quietly. No questions about the broken car windows. No curiosity about the woman the news had painted as both hero and menace. Just indifference, casual and cutting. Autumn took her receipt, walked back outside and climbed into the rental car, still littered with tiny flecks of glass, despite her attempts to clean it out the night before. The message, "Stay in your lane," still echoed in her bones. The engine groaned to life, and for a moment she sat motionless, her mind grinding louder than the motor. She was supposed to be gone by now. She'd planned to head back to Atlanta, lie low, and disappear behind the curtains of public memory. But nothing felt over. Nothing felt safe, especially not after the military coin she'd found beneath the glass. It had the insignia of SEAL Team Echo, but it wasn't Walt Maddox's. Someone else was sending her a message. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adira Banks, a Memphis-based black journalist who had been quietly following her story. 10 minutes. Alley coffee. Back patio. Autumn hesitated. The press had already twisted her narrative into clickbait. She had been praised, then smeared, then pitied. But Adira's tone in her previous messages was different. Curious, sharp, unafraid. Not trying to brand her, just trying to listen. 10 minutes later, Autumn pulled into the alley behind Alley Coffee, a small black-owned cafe hidden behind a Baptist church. The back patio was rustic. Weathered tables, cracked brick walls climbing with ivy, and a string of dim patio lights overhead. Even in daylight, Adira sat alone, sipping from a white mug, her notebook closed beside her. "You made it," Adira said, not rising but offering a warm nod. Autumn took the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure if I should." "Neither was I," Adira said honestly, "but here we are." They sat in quiet for a moment before Adira spoke again. "Tell me what they didn't show in the interviews." Autumn exhaled. "Where do I start?" And then it came pouring out. The second traffic stop. The smashed windows. The message on the windshield. The silence from the police. The suspicious trooper who never filed a report. The file Maddox Truth 1995 that had appeared on her phone in the middle of the night. Adira didn't interrupt. She wrote in short, sharp strokes, nodding occasionally. She didn't ask for drama. She asked for details. She wasn't looking to exploit. She was trying to excavate. You know what frightens them the most? Adira finally asked, setting her pen down. Autumn looked up. A black woman who refuses to lose her calm. Adira said, "They bait us. They push and poke until we snap. Then they point and say, 'See? Angry, violent, threatening. But you stayed steady. That's why they're coming harder." Autumn's hands trembled slightly. "I've thought about leaving, going off grid. I don't want my father targeted. Or my brother. They've already gotten calls. Messages." "I get it," Adira replied. "But every system of silence counts on that fear. They depend on your retreat. Your exhaustion. That's how they win." "They almost did last night," Autumn said softly. Adira leaned forward. "And yet here you are, telling your story. That's grace. And grace terrifies them more than rage ever could." Autumn looked down at her hands. "You think anyone would believe me if I released everything?" "Doesn't matter if they believe it," Adira said. "It matters that it's real, and that it exists somewhere outside of them." They talked another half hour, about Memphis, about the South, about buried archives of racial misconduct, and how justice often expired before it was even born. When Autumn stood to leave, Adira slid a flash drive across the table. "Off-record copy of your file," she said. "I decrypted the zip. You'll want to read it when you're ready." Autumn paused. "You already saw it." Adira nodded. "I didn't download it. Just peeked inside. It's not just about you." Back in her car, Autumn gripped the steering wheel tightly. She had shown up to that coffee shop thinking she was alone. She was wrong. She wasn't alone. She was surrounded by watchers and warriors alike, and both were closing in. Her phone buzzed again. This time, from the secure line Grayson Dunn had set up for her after Walt's death. The encrypted message was short. "SEAL Team Echo requests your presence. Fort Braddock. 1600 hours. Ceremony requested by Maddox." Autumn stared at it for a full minute. A military base. A formal request. A ceremony in her name. She should have been overwhelmed. Maybe she was. But all she felt was resolve. She typed her response slowly. "I'll be there." The drive ahead would be long. But her entire life had been a marathon in silence. What was one more mile? She was no soldier. She wore no badge. But she carried something heavier. Truth still sealed in an envelope. Still lodged in her chest. As she pulled onto the main road again, her Bluetooth speaker crackled, unexpectedly. A new file had arrived. She tapped play. It was an audio recording. Grainy. Male voices. One whispered, "Operation Echo must stay buried. If she speaks, we all fall. Do you understand?" Autumn's grip on the steering wheel tightened, as the voice repeated the phrase once more. This time with more urgency. A second voice joined the recording. Deeper, colder, saying just 4 words. Then silence her. Permanently. The gates of Fort Braddock were larger than life. An arch of metal, guarded by stern-faced Marines, and a security system more precise than any airport terminal. Autumn Carter sat still behind the wheel of her rental, heart thudding like a second engine beneath her ribs. Her palms were damp on the steering wheel. This wasn't just a military base. This was a fortress of legacy, of power, of quiet, deadly history. When she handed over her ID at the gate, the guard looked at it, then back at her. "You're the civilian for the Maddox ceremony?" Autumn nodded. "Yes." "Escorts waiting. Drive through the first checkpoint, and pull into the marked space. They'll walk you in." He didn't smile. He didn't scoff. Just gave a nod and waved her forward. But his eyes lingered. Not with awe, not with hate, but something in between. Uncertainty. Inside the base, the scenery changed. The road wound through rows of barracks, training fields, and brick buildings, all uniform in color and energy, controlled, sharp-edged, coded. The history of 1,000 whispered missions and blood-soaked medals lived behind those walls. She parked beside a black Suburban already waiting. A young soldier stepped out. "Miss Carter, I'm Specialist Rios. Follow me, please." Autumn walked behind him, her navy blazer clinging slightly to her frame in the afternoon heat. She had chosen a plain white blouse and black slacks, nothing flashy. She wanted to be respectful, not performative. The weight of the envelope from Walt Maddox still pressed against her side from inside her bag. The ceremony was being held in the Valor Room, a domed auditorium reserved for internal military acknowledgments. Most civilians never saw it. When she entered, the murmur of voices halted. She froze. The seats were filled. Maybe 80 men and women, most in uniform, mostly white, many decorated with ribbons and pins that signaled lives lived through conflict. A few turned to see her. One chuckled quietly. Another leaned to whisper something to the man beside him. She caught fragments.
That's her?
You're kidding. They're honoring her? She kept walking. At the front, Commander Grayson Dunn stood behind a podium, reading from a folder. When he saw her, he stepped aside and motioned toward a single seat on stage, far right. She took it without meeting anyone's eyes. Grayson began again. We're gathered here today to fulfill the final request of SEAL veteran Walter Maddox. Decorated for operations no one in this room is authorized to discuss in full.
I got a few stiff laughs.
But his final request wasn't for silence. It was for recognition, not of himself, but of someone whose name won't appear on any mission logs. Someone who wasn't in uniform, but acted with honor, with instinct, with grace. A few eyes rolled. One man in the second row snorted. Grayson opened a sealed envelope and began to read. To the men I once led, and the system I once obeyed. This is not an apology, it's a confession. I followed orders that made me a hero on paper, and a ghost in my own soul. The only time I felt human again was at a gas station in Atlanta, when a stranger helped me without knowing who I was, or who I'd failed to be. The room went still. That woman reminded me of who I could have been. Not who I was, not who they said I was, but who I wanted to be. That woman, Autumn Carter, is the most American person I've met. Gasps rippled. One of the men in uniform lowered his head. Another crossed his arms tighter. Autumn sat still, staring ahead. Grayson folded the letter. Walt Maddox did not ask us to build a statue. He didn't ask for a ceremony. He asked us to listen and to act. He turned toward Autumn. Miss Carter, will you join me at the podium? She stood slowly. Every step echoed in the Valor Room like a drumbeat. When she reached the podium, she saw them, rows of stoic faces, some skeptical, some curious, some barely masking disdain. She felt their weight, pressing against her like wind against glass. I didn't come here to be honored, she said softly. I came because someone gave me something no one else ever has. Truth. And that's rare. Especially from a man like Walt, who had every reason to stay silent. She paused. I didn't save a life. I didn't plan anything. I saw a man who needed help, and I helped. But if that's now enough to be called American, then maybe we need to rethink who we give that word to. A few heads nodded slowly. Others remained stone. I don't wear a uniform, she continued, but I've fought every day of my life to exist without shrinking, without apologizing, without proving my humanity. She turned away from the mic and returned to her seat, hands clenched tightly in her lap. Grayson stepped back up. He opened a final document. The Department of Defense, in response to Maddox's final request and internal review, has extended a formal offer to Miss Carter. Autumn blinked. He continued. Position: Public Ethics Liaison to the Civilian Oversight and Veterans Integrity Task Force. Civilian GS-15, with immediate security clearance review. Gasps. Someone muttered, "You're joking." Grayson ignored it. The position would involve auditing racial bias claims within veteran service systems and engaging directly with ethics panels. You would be the first civilian, the first black woman, and the first person without military ties to hold the role. Autumn's mind reeled. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't even known it existed. And yet here it was, offered on a stage she had never been meant to walk. She opened her mouth to respond, when a sharp vibration hit her phone. She glanced down. A new anonymous message flashed on her screen. If you take that job, you'll regret it. You think this is over? We haven't even started. The moment Autumn Carter read the message on her phone. If you take that job, you'll regret it. Her gut told her that saying yes wasn't just a career move. It was a line drawn in a countrywide sandstorm. But she didn't flinch. Not visibly. Not then. She looked up from the screen at the faces surrounding her. Some stunned, some suspicious, others visibly seething. Her voice didn't tremble when she turned to Commander Grayson Dunn and said, "I accept." No fanfare followed. No applause. Just a stifled silence, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see if she'd flinch first. She didn't. Later, behind closed doors, Grayson pulled her aside. "You understand what this means, don't you?" he asked. "I do. You'll be watched. Not just monitored, targeted. This position, they never wanted someone like you in it." "That's why I said yes," she replied. "I'm not here for a title. I'm here to tear the hinges off the doors they swore I'd never walk through." Grayson nodded, but his face was clouded. "You're brave." "No," she said. "I'm exhausted. There's a difference." That night, back in Atlanta, her inbox exploded. Right-wing talk shows labeled her a race hoaxer turned bureaucrat. Her photo was aired alongside inflammatory headlines. From gas pump to government pawn, one radio host declared she was pushing black victimhood into the heart of the Pentagon. Autumn didn't respond to any of it. But it didn't stop at words. 3 nights later, her father called. Voice tight, breath shallow. "They hit the house," he whispered. "Spray paint. All over the porch. Fence too." She drove to her childhood home in silence. The first thing she saw was the red paint smeared across the front door. Traitor. Her father stood beside her, jaw clenched. They waited until after midnight. No one saw a damn thing. Autumn's fingers curled into fists. "I'm so sorry." "No," he interrupted. "Don't be. This just means you're exactly where you need to be." They scrubbed it clean together, his hand on hers as they wiped away hate in silence. The next day, Autumn launched her new initiative, Everyday Valor. It wasn't flashy. No logo. No slogan. Just a series of community-led digital storytelling workshops, focused on capturing stories of unsung courage, especially from Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities, often excluded from the mainstream narratives of service and sacrifice. Her first campaign went viral for a different reason. It wasn't her face that trended. It was a 12-year-old girl from Jackson, Mississippi, who had comforted a boy being bullied for his accent. That clip was shared over 4 million times. Autumn's platform grew, but so did the pushback. She received threats daily. Her Twitter DMs were a battlefield. Her name appeared on fringe militia forums. There were whispers that she was under surveillance, not for protection, but because the powers that be didn't know what she'd do with the files. Walt had given her. Still, she kept going. She refused interviews, but accepted small speaking gigs. Libraries, community colleges, VFW halls. She didn't lecture. She listened. And that became her weapon, showing up in places they never expected her to. Her brother Emery handled most of the communications. Her friend Adira Banks helped manage the media filtration, and in every new city, someone, usually Black, usually under 30, came up to her and whispered, "Don't stop." One afternoon, while reviewing community submissions, Autumn received a sealed envelope via courier. No return address. Inside was a letter, typed on embossed paper.
"Miss Carter."
"We admire your boldness and your vision. Many of us believe in what you're doing, even if we cannot say so publicly. Please accept this gesture as both support and solidarity." Beneath the note was a certified cashier's check for $1,000. No strings, no signatures, or so it seemed. At the bottom of the letter, in smaller print, was a final line. "We ask only one thing. Refrain from releasing any military files obtained during your tenure. Let the past remain buried. For all our sakes." Autumn stared at the check, her fingers numb. It was life-changing money. Funding that could help Everyday Valor expand into underserved communities nationwide, help pay for scholarships, cover travel, security, tech, and staffing. It could make the dream real. But it wasn't clean. It was hush money wrapped in diplomacy and masked as philanthropy. She showed it to no one. Not yet. Not even Adira. That night, she placed the check in a drawer, stared at the ceiling, and listened to the sounds of the city outside. Cars, sirens, dogs barking in the distance. But beneath all of it, a question echoed. What price does silence demand? The next morning, a second letter arrived. It was handwritten, short, precise, untraceable. "You've been warned. We don't ask twice." Autumn opened her laptop, ready to respond, but froze. On her desktop was a file she hadn't opened since Memphis. Maddox Truth 1995.zip. And now beside it a second file had appeared, one she didn't download. It was labeled ICO Collateral 1, and it had a countdown timer ticking in red. The offer arrived wrapped in luxury, but it reeked of rot. Zariah Brooks stared at the sleek silver briefcase now perched uninvited on her reclaimed wood coffee table. The man who delivered it, a pale, square-jawed executive in an unblemished charcoal suit, sat stiff-backed on her couch, fingers interlaced with the patience of someone used to buying silence. He didn't offer a name, just credentials, a corporate logo embossed in gold, and a smile so thin it barely bent his lips. "Miss Brooks," he said, voice buttery, "our client believes in what you're building. Everyday valor has momentum, visibility, reach. It deserves to scale." She blinked, her heart already thudding with warning. "Who's your client?" He gave a harmless shrug. "A private defense partner with strong ties to government and historical significance." Zariah's eyes narrowed. "You mean Racentech Defense Solutions? The one caught using segregated housing for contractors in 2003. The one sued for racially biased hiring practices. That Racentech." He didn't flinch, just pushed the briefcase forward, like it was an olive branch instead of a time bomb. $1 million, he said. "Tax-free, no strings, except one minor request. You continue everyday valor, but you avoid commentary on certain policies related to military justice reform. That's all." Her stomach coiled. The same stomach that had endured microaggressions in every hallway, the sting of handcuffs for a crime she didn't commit, and 1,000 slurs hidden behind polite corporate smiles. "You want to buy my silence? We want to protect the stability of institutions," he replied calmly. "In exchange you get resources, autonomy, and impact." She stood up slowly. "You're offering me blood money." His smile didn't crack. "I'm offering you relevance." Flash her memory pulled her back, uninvited to a hospital corridor reeking of antiseptic and grief. Zariah at 16, sitting beside her mother's trembling hand. Her baby brother had died in that hospital, misdiagnosed. His pain dismissed. Hours too late, a white nurse whispered. He should have been admitted last night. The hospital's lawyer arrived the next week. Smooth, white, confident, offered a settlement wrapped in confidentiality. Her mother, eyes still swollen from crying, listened in silence. Then, with the voice of a lioness, she said, "My son's life isn't for sale. I'll take my justice loud." That roar now echoed in Zariah's bones. She faced the man again. "You can leave. Take your briefcase." His eyes flickered, something cold passing through them. "Miss Brooks, be careful. Refusing help sometimes has consequences." Zariah's jaw set. "So does trying to buy a black woman's voice." He left without a word, but not before leaving a business card, as if the poison could still tempt her later. Within hours, word spread. Zariah Brooks had rejected $1 million offer to stay quiet. Social media exploded. Supporters called her a hero. A wave of black mothers flooded her inbox with stories of resilience. But alongside the praise came the storm. Anonymous threats, hacked emails, photos of her father's house sprayed with traitor in red. Her team begged her to relocate. She refused. That same night, as she sat with a cup of chamomile tea, her phone buzzed. The screen showed a contact she hadn't expected. "Clint Weaver, VA Hospital." She answered on the first ring. It wasn't him. A nurse's gentle voice said he had passed peacefully in his sleep just hours before. They'd found his Bible in his hands, open to a verse about reconciliation. Zariah didn't cry. She sat still, breathing slow, staring at the blank wall across from her. The quiet hit harder than any insult. Clint had become more than just a veteran. He was her paradox, her proof that people could change, even after decades. His funeral aired nationwide. Footage of his SEAL teammates in full dress uniform flanked the news. Cameras zoomed in on the folded flag handed to a distant cousin. But the only mention of Zariah came at the end. A black and white photo of the gas station. A salute frozen in time. The media moved on. The hashtags faded. But grief has a way of whispering, even when the world goes silent. 3 days later, just as Zariah began sorting Clint's letters and mementos, a knock came at her door. No press, no neighbors, just a solemn-looking black man in a gray USPS uniform, holding a flat brown package marked legal delivery, Weaver Estate. She signed. He nodded. No words passed. Inside the box, tucked in layers of thick parchment and sealed envelopes, lay a single sheet of white paper. On it, in Clint's careful script, was written, "For Zariah, you showed me courage I never had. Now I need you to see something I was too scared to share. Coordinates 35.6872. Trust only yourself. The truth lives here. Zariah stared at the numbers. Her fingers trembled. They led to North Carolina. Deep in the forested zone of an old SEAL training compound, long since abandoned, she remembered Clint once mumbling about old ghosts in Carolina. She looked up. Outside her window, the sky was gray, just like the day she first saw him at the gas station. Her gut twisted. Whatever lay at those coordinates wasn't just about Clint's past. It was about hers. As Zariah folded the letter, the lights flickered in her apartment. Then again, she looked out the window and noticed a black SUV idling across the street. Engine off. No one stepped out. It just sat there, waiting. The forest swallowed sound. As Zariah parked her rented SUV along the gravel shoulder of a forgotten road, she felt the weight of something ancient settle in her chest. The North Carolina woods loomed like silent witnesses. Tall, shadowed, unmoved by the trespass of history. Birds chirped somewhere overhead, but even they seemed hesitant. She stepped out, boots crunching over twigs and dry moss, the coordinates Clint had written guiding her handheld GPS through every step. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Every few feet she'd glance back over her shoulder, half expecting another black SUV to emerge from the trees. Headlights off, threats cloaked in civility. No one came. The path grew narrower. Sweat rolled down her back. She moved with purpose, trying to ignore how every rustling leaf sounded like a whisper. Clint's letter had been clear. Trust only yourself. An hour in, the GPS began blinking red. She'd arrived. A slight clearing opened up before her, surrounded by twisted oak roots, and the faint imprint of what once might have been a training post, now rotted and overgrown. And there, partially buried beneath brush and mud, was a steel corner jutting from the earth like a relic, resisting time. Zariah knelt. Her hands dug with trembling determination, nails caked in dirt. She unearthed it, a thick, rusted military lockbox. Heavier than it looked. She took a deep breath, pressed the latch, and opened it. Inside, a bundle of leather-bound journals, yellowed with age, a row of faded Navy SEAL medals laid gently atop them, and underneath, wrapped in an American flag that had dulled with weather and guilt, was an old M16 rifle. Zariah flinched at the sight, not from fear but history. The weapon was symbolic, and in Clint's world, symbols spoke louder than confessions. She sat back on her heels and opened the first journal. Clint's handwriting was raw, slanted, unforgiving. We were trained to fight enemies overseas. No one prepared us for the war within. The entries spanned decades. Missions, names, stories she couldn't verify, but felt the truth burn through the ink. SEAL commanders who used racial slurs in planning meetings. Black operatives forced into more dangerous missions with less backup. Promotions blocked. Injuries ignored. Honors redirected. Zariah read slowly, each paragraph laced with shame. Clint had carried like an extra rucksack for years. One name appeared over and over. Commander Travis Ryland. A man still active, now holding a high-level Pentagon role. Then a second name made her breath hitch. Lieutenant Anthony Harrell. The same Harrell she'd met briefly at Fort Braddock. He'd shaken her hand, smiled, even called her inspirational. Clint had written, Harrell once said, "They're lucky we let them serve at all." I didn't confront him. I didn't protect anyone. I stayed quiet. That silence cost lives. Zariah's vision blurred. The wind rustled through the trees like a warning. She turned the page and found a sealed envelope, labeled, "Open only after reading everything." Inside was a USB drive, weather sealed, marked in permanent ink. Final mission, for Zariah only. Heart pounding, she pulled her laptop from her backpack and inserted the drive. The screen flickered. Then Clint appeared, sitting in a dimly lit room, his face thinner than she remembered, voice raspy but clear. "If you're watching this, Zariah, it means I'm gone, and it means you found the truth. I owe you a legacy that isn't soaked in silence." He looked straight at the camera. "I've kept things hidden for too long. Racism didn't just live in the South, or on the streets. It lived in our commands, in our ranks, in our orders. We were elite warriors trained to kill, but some of the deadliest wounds came from within. I watched brothers bleed while others laughed." Clint paused, breathing hard. "There's a file on this drive. Names, operations, proof. It won't be admissible in court, but it'll shake the tree. You have the voice I never did. And I need you to shout. He looked down, then back again, his eyes moist. And one more thing. The photo you'll find at the bottom of the box. Look closely. That child in the corner. That's your grandmother. She saved my team once. In Africa. I never told you. Never knew until recently. But maybe kindness runs deeper than blood. Maybe what you did for me at that gas station was destiny circling back. A video ended. Zariah sat in stunned silence. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. Her grandmother, Clint's savior. She dove back into the box, hands rifling through medals and folded letters, until she found it. A black and white photo, cracked at the edges. A group of African villagers, tending to injured seals. And there, on the side, a young girl no older than 13, wide-eyed, strong-boned. Her grandmother, no question. The world tilted under her feet. All this time she'd believed her kindness was spontaneous, pure, but it wasn't random. It was legacy. It was circle. It was story returning to its roots. But that truth was dangerous. She packed everything back into her bag. Heart a thunderstorm. As she stood to leave, her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. We know what you found. Stop now while you still can. As Zariah turned to leave, a branch snapped nearby. Then another, not animal movement. Human. She froze. Through the trees, 2 red laser dots flicked across the trunk beside her, then disappeared. The first upload was hesitant, but the truth in her chest was a storm that couldn't wait. Zariah Brooks sat hunched over a battered laptop in a dimly lit Airbnb, her finger hovering above the post button. The air felt tense, too still, like the world was holding its breath. Her ears echoed with Clint's final words. Shout. Even if they try to shut you down. That was all she needed. With one breath she clicked. The Other America Episode 1, The Silence Inside, went live. The effect was instant. Within 10 minutes her name surged across platforms. Hashtags exploded. The Other America, Zariah Brooks, Expose Command. Her inbox drowned in everything from praise to profanity. Viewers from over 30 countries watched Clint's video, their comments unfiltered. She's risking her life for us. Liar. Finally, someone said it. The battle lines weren't just political, they were deeply personal. TikTok was first to amplify it, then Twitter. Instagram Reels began using her narration, layered over photos of black soldiers in uniform. SEAL veterans reached out quietly, others more dangerous, reached out loudly. The wave had begun, and Zariah was now the eye of it. The next morning, a knock came, not from reporters but a stiff-suited federal agent holding a sealed envelope. He didn't speak, just delivered it and left. Inside, a subpoena from the Office of Military Legal Affairs. She was now under investigation for violations of the Espionage Act. Possible prison time. No warning. No appeal. Zariah didn't panic. She opened her laptop again. Episode 2. Post. Then Episode 3. Each upload carried deeper truths. Clint's handwritten letters, transcripts of racial abuse within the SEAL hierarchy, sealed documents from the coordinates she'd uncovered in North Carolina. Her voiceover remained calm, almost disquieting in its clarity. This isn't about loving or hating the military. It's about demanding its soul back. Crowds gathered. Some chanted her name, like a war cry. Others showed up in MAGA hats, screaming into bullhorns, waving signs that called her a traitor. One protester tossed a brick through the Airbnb's window. Another mailed her a noose made of red, white, and blue yarn. Police took reports but gave her a look that said, "Don't expect much." Her team begged her to pause the uploads. She refused. One morning, amidst the chaos, a small lavender envelope arrived. No return address. The handwriting was uneven, childlike. Inside, a letter. Dear Miss Zariah, I'm 11. I live in Chicago. I used to hide my skin. Then I saw your video. You made me brave. I told my class my dad was in jail because the system was broken. I don't whisper anymore. Love, Layla J. Zariah's hands trembled as she held the note. It was barely longer than a paragraph, but it weighed more than any legal threat. In that moment, she understood. This wasn't a media moment. It was a mirror. For every Layla watching, she had to keep going. The next episode began with Layla's voice, softly read by Zariah. I don't whisper anymore. That line echoed like a sermon. The post went viral within 3 hours. Major networks ignored it, but international outlets didn't. The BBC aired segments titled America's Hidden War. An Australian podcast invited her to speak. Al Jazeera requested an interview. Her voice had slipped past borders, now shaping global conversations about race, military ethics, and systemic cover-ups. Then came the encrypted files. The first few trickled in. PDFs with seal insignia, time-stamped audio logs, classified ops reports, all unsigned, each one accompanied by a digital note. For Echo. These weren't anonymous haters. These were SEAL Team Echo operatives. The same ones who had stood on her porch weeks ago were now leaking the skeletons of their former commanders. She read one report 3 times. The name at the top, Commander Travis Ryland. The same Ryland still active in DC. It detailed a training incident in Kandahar. A black recruit, Joseph Manning, was sent into a hostile zone with no backup. A miscommunication, the official report claimed, but this file told the truth. Audio transcripts, personal testimonies, and Ryland's own handwritten comments scrawled in the margin. Let's see if the boy can handle real pressure. If not, one less mouth to feed. Zariah covered her mouth as bile rose in her throat. She knew Joseph Manning's mother. She had written to Everyday Valor once, begging for someone to explain how her son died alone. No one had answered her. Until now. Zariah turned the footage into episode 5. He didn't just die. He was sent, sacrificed, for being black and brave. This time, the internet didn't just trend, it exploded. Ryland's name was wiped from the Pentagon's site within hours. Anonymous DoD employees began retweeting her content. Supporters lined the gates of the Lincoln Memorial, holding signs. Tell it, Zariah. The other America is real. Still, the threats escalated. Her emails were hacked. Her phone tracked. Private investigators followed her cousin to work. Someone left a gutted stuffed bear on her father's porch. The message was clear. Back off, or we'll dig deeper. She didn't flinch. Because somewhere in the chaos, she'd realized she was no longer alone. She was a voice, but also a vessel, carrying the pain of generations who were told to be quiet, to assimilate, to survive politely. Episode 6 ended with Clint's final journal entry. I left too much unsaid. She didn't. That night, after uploading her latest episode, she sat in her darkened room, refreshing the analytics feed. Thousands of shares, millions of views, global conversation sparked. Then her screen blinked. A new email slid into her inbox. No subject, no sender. She hesitated before clicking. Inside, one file. Encrypted, no password prompt. Just a single title. Operation Nomad, cleared for eyes only. And below it, in plain text.
This will burn everything. Are you ready?
The marble floors of the Capitol echoed beneath Zariah's heels like distant gunfire. She had never walked these halls before. Never imagined she'd be summoned into the machinery of power by the very country that once tried to erase her. Yet here she was. Not as a defendant, not as a problem to manage, but as a witness. The congressional hearing chamber buzzed with low whispers as she entered. Politicians on both sides of the aisle adjusted their microphones and glanced down at prepared statements. Reporters filled the balcony above, pens poised. Her name trended globally that morning. Zariah testifies. But Zariah wasn't interested in spectacle. Her palms were steady, her mind clear. She looked down at her handwritten notes, worn edges, coffee stain on the corner. These weren't talking points. They were scars turned into scripture. A gavel knocked. Silence blanketed the room. Miss Zariah Brooks, the chairwoman announced. You have the floor. Zariah stood. Her voice didn't tremble. I'm here today because a man I didn't know, an old veteran named Clint Weaver, needed gas. I paid for it. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know he'd led a SEAL team, or that he carried guilt in his bones like shrapnel. I just knew he needed help. That kindness changed my life. But more importantly, it exposed a system still poisoned by silence. Her words hit hard. Even the stone-faced senator from Texas leaned forward. Eyebrows lifted. She continued, We say we love our soldiers. But what about the black ones who return home forgotten? What about the officers whose promotions are quietly stalled? What about the silence that follows every complaint filed and buried? She paused, then added, her voice firm. This isn't just about racism in the military. It's about what we allow to go unchecked, because it doesn't happen on camera. By the end of her 10-minute testimony, the room was still. One congressman visibly wiped away a tear. Even the defense subcommittee chair nodded, whispering something to his aide. But Zariah wasn't done. She placed a new folder on the podium and slid it forward. I'm proposing what I call the Weaver Act, named after the man who first dared to confront his own complicity. The act calls for mandatory racial oversight reviews in all branches of the military, external investigators, whistleblower protections, a public database for racial bias complaints, real accountability, not just slogans on recruitment posters. The room shifted. That word accountability landed like a grenade. The hearing was broadcast live. Clips of her statement flooded every network. Even news outlets that had once painted her as anti-American now struggled to discredit her without sounding racist. The next morning, her former employer, the small financial firm that had suspended her pending conduct review, issued a public apology. They offered to reinstate her, with back pay, with a promotion. Zariah didn't blink. She declined. I'm not going back to a cubicle that only values me when I trend. Instead, she stood at a press conference outside the Lincoln Memorial and announced the launch of her nonprofit, Echo Forward, a nationwide organization committed to mentoring Black veterans, amplifying whistleblower stories, and fighting institutional silence. Donations flooded in. So did threats. But Zariah had long since stopped measuring her safety against someone else's comfort. She was interviewed on 60 Minutes. She appeared on Trevor Noah's final episode, where he called her the conscience America didn't know it needed. In one photo that went viral, she sat on a bench outside a VA hospital, holding the hand of a crying Black veteran who whispered, "You said what I couldn't." Still, she stayed grounded. Every morning she made her mother's tea recipe, ginger, lemon, and honey. Every night she reread Clint's journals, sometimes aloud, as if his words still needed witnesses. And then one rainy afternoon, just after finishing a radio interview, came the knock. It was light, hesitant, like it didn't belong in the loudness her life had become. Zariah opened the door. There on the porch stood a white girl, maybe 17, with freckles, frizzy red hair pulled into a loose braid, and a plastic grocery bag in hand. Her clothes were plain, her posture nervous. Zariah raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" The girl nodded slowly. I'm from Springdale. That's Clint Weaver's hometown." Zariah's breath caught. The girl looked down, then reached into her bag. She pulled out a small, carved wooden box, scratched but intact. "This was in his attic, my grandma's house. Clint used to board there in the 90s after he retired. She passed away last month, and we found this behind a wall panel. It had your name taped on the inside lid." Zariah took the box gently, heart thudding. The girl hesitated, then added softly, "There's a photo inside. Well, I think you need to see it." Zariah opened the lid slowly, and froze. Inside, beneath an old faded photograph of African villagers, was a birth certificate, her grandmother's name, and Clint's signature. The box was heavier than it looked. Zariah carried it into her living room, like it held the weight of an entire past, setting it gently on the same table where months ago she'd first opened Clint's letter. Her hands hovered above the lid, unsure if she was ready for what waited inside. The red-haired girl from Springdale still stood near the door, watching silently, shifting nervously on her feet. "You said it had my name inside?" Zariah asked, her voice low, breath shallow. The girl nodded. "On a piece of masking tape. It was stuck on the inside. Just for Zariah Brooks. That's all it said." Zariah blinked away the rising pressure behind her eyes. It didn't make sense. Clint had never mentioned this box. Never told her to expect more. But something about the girl's presence, the urgency in her long drive from Arkansas, told Zariah this wasn't random. It couldn't be. She reached for the latch. It didn't budge. She paused, then noticed the small, rusted keyhole beneath the carved wood etching of a seal trident. The lock wasn't broken, but it required a specific key. She frowned, then remembered something. Rushing to the hallway closet, she pulled out Clint's final envelope, the one she had tucked away and never opened, unsure if it was meant for now or for later. Inside was a brass key. No note, no explanation, just a small, tarnished object that had seemed, until now, unimportant. She returned to the table, inserted the key. Click. The lid creaked open. Dust swirled in the afternoon sunlight. As the box unfolded its memory, Zariah stared down, her breath stolen. Inside were photographs, old black and white, some creased from years of handling, villagers in worn but proud clothing, children grinning, holding fresh water jugs. U.S. soldiers crouched in the background, bruised but alive. Zariah sifted through each one until her fingers froze. There she was. Young, maybe 14. Her skin the same deep tone as Zariah's, her eyes unmistakable. Strong knowing, a quiet fire behind them. Her grandmother, Ayla. She stood beside a wounded seal, crouched with a bowl in one hand, and a palm placed over the man's chest as if praying. The man, half conscious, was Clint Weaver. Younger, bleeding, but smiling faintly. Zariah's throat tightened. At the bottom of the stack was a page torn from a yellow legal pad. Clint's handwriting again. I never knew her name back then. We didn't speak the same language, but she saved me. She dragged me out of a field of bodies, pressed water to my lips, whispered something in a tongue I didn't understand, but I felt it. Peace. I never told anyone, never even knew who she really was, until I saw the photo again after our porch visit. After I saw you, and I knew you were her echo. Zariah sank into the couch, hand over her mouth. The world around her blurred. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just kindness meeting regret. This was legacy wrapped in history's cruel twist. Two bloodlines that had touched across continents, across war, across generations. That moment at the gas station, she whispered aloud, wasn't about fate. It was a return. The red-haired girl, her name was Eva, cleared her throat gently. There's more. Zariah looked up. Eva handed her a folded piece of stationery paper, yellowed from age. It was a deed, and a foundation charter, partially completed. Signed by Clint. The Weaver Brooks Foundation, to bridge the gap between forgotten veterans and the black youth who will shape this country's future. Zariah's heart clenched. There it was. The final stitch in a thread she didn't know she'd been following all her life. Clint had intended to start this with her, to build a space where his ghosts could find redemption, and her fire could light futures. The foundation was already named, already imagined. She would finish it. 2 weeks later, the Weaver Brooks Foundation opened its first office in Atlanta. The launch ceremony was small, just 50 people, most of them veterans and community organizers. But the media came anyway. Cameras captured the first moments of what would become a national movement. Veterans walked in. Students walked out with internships. Elderly black servicemen told stories they'd never said out loud. Kids from underfunded schools shook hands with retired generals. The building pulsed with a new kind of patriotism. One rooted not in flags or silence, but in truth and connection. Zariah stood beneath a mural painted on the back wall. Clint saluting her at the gas station. Her grandmother's face in the sky above him like a guardian. She gave no speech. Just watched. Let the moment breathe. Later that night, she sat alone in her office. Lights low. Clint's final journal open beside her. The words blurred behind tired eyes. The journey had begun with a $10 tank of gas, and now sat at the crossroads of history and healing. She looked out the window, watching people filter out, her fingers tracing the edge of the wooden box now displayed behind glass. A knock interrupted her thoughts. This one was firm, confident. She opened the door to a suited man in his 50s, silver-haired, with a congressional lapel pin on his blazer. His expression was respectful, even humble. Miss Brooks, he said, offering a folder. My name's Representative Calloway. I'd like to propose something. She opened the folder. A legislative draft. A photo of a new federal building breaking ground in D.C. And a title, the Zariah Brooks Justice Center for Military Ethics. Zariah stared at it, stunned. Why me? Calloway smiled gently. Because sometimes the most American thing a person can do is tell the truth. Zariah looked down at the proposal, then back up. But the congressman was already walking away, his voice trailing behind him. We just need your yes. No one should have to prove their innocence just to survive a trip to the store. No one should be silenced because of the color of their skin. If Zariah's story made you feel something, anything, don't scroll past it. Type yes if you believe in justice. Share her truth.